This is Dina Nunziato, Clinical Director of Anxiety Institute in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm going to speak with you today about stress and anxiety among high school students. High school is a stressful time for students, which often includes multiple demands of academics, family responsibilities, extracurricular commitments, social expectations, preparing for college, and many other stressful responsibilities. And this past year, high school students have had the overwhelming stress of doing all of this in the middle of a global pandemic. So we talk an awful lot about stress, but what exactly is stress? One way to think about it is that stress is a conscious or unconscious, psychological or physical state resulting from physical or mental demands that challenge adaptive capacities. Now, stress in and of itself is not a negative thing. The visual on this slide is the Yerkes-Dodson stress curve. It's a bell curve that shows that at the top of the curve, when we are experiencing optimal stress, we typically perform at our peak. We're healthy and focused and challenged. Many of you might recall times in your life where you have had too little stress, when you're inactive, where you're bored, where you just don't feel like there's enough going on. Unfortunately, many of us are also very familiar with the other end of the bell curve, which we consider to be overly stressed, chronic stress, fatigue, exhaustion. Panic, anxiety, and anger may also accompany high levels of stress. So often we talk about people saying they're burned out. We can think about that as that extreme end of the Yerkes-Dodson stress curve. So what exactly is the stress response? Otherwise known as the fight, flight, or freeze response, it's a primitive response initiated by the body in reaction to a perceived threat. It's an activation of our sympathetic nervous system. The good news is that our autonomic nervous system is made up of two branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which we just talked about, which induces stress response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which induces the relaxation response. Both are absolutely necessary in order for us to stay healthy and balanced. The stress response in and of itself is not a negative thing. We have a response to a stress, our body responds, our autonomic nervous system responds, and then in an ideal world, the stressor resolves and we go back to balance. But this is an important point. The body must return to baseline and rebuild its stores of energy and stress hormones for the next stress response. If we don't return to that baseline, if we don't have the balance of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system response, we can go into a state of chronic stress. So what does chronic stress look like? Unfortunately, many of us are all too familiar with the symptoms of chronic stress. They may include headaches, sleep loss, upset stomach, increase in blood pressure, even chest pains. And so many of our teens are experiencing that, especially now. So how do you know when you're experiencing chronic stress? What are the signs and signals that your body sends to you to say, hey, I'm experiencing chronic stress. You need to pay attention. Well, there are at least 4 different classifications of signals. The first are physical stress signals. Those may include headaches, stomach issues, hives, shortness of breath, fatigue, racing heart, sleep issues, and more. The next are emotional stress signals. So many of us, when we're stressed, may feel anxious or depressed. We may feel panicked. We may become tearful or irritable, even angry. And some of us just start to experience a complete lack of interest. We just shut down. There are also behavioral stress signals. Unfortunately, many of us may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like smoking, excessive alcohol use, overeating, even social isolation, or poor work performance. Those are some of the behavioral stress signals of chronic stress. And then, of course, lastly, there are cognitive stress signals, which again, we see so often in high school students. Concentration difficulties, forgetfulness, diminished creativity, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing. Those are all cognitive signals of chronic stress. The good news is that the autonomic nervous system is built for balance. And just like chronic stress can be induced, the relaxation response can be induced. And we can do this consciously if we understand how our bodies elicit the relaxation response. So again, preventing the negative effects of stress and eliciting the relaxation response is critical. Keys to counteracting the negative effects of stress are recovery, which we're going to talk about in a minute, healthy habits, and just release, exercise, enjoyment, fun, pleasure. So how do you elicit the relaxation response? Think about ways in which you start to feel relaxed. You start to feel calmer, as if you can focus, as if you can really sort of take a minute and recenter yourself. And this word cloud here has some words that I use in order to elicit the relaxation response for myself. I can take deep breaths. I often stretch or have a cup of hot tea. I take a walk, but that's going to be different for each one of us. So it's very important that you think about how you respond, how your body elicits the relaxation response. It's important that we have tools that not just for long-term macro recovery, which we would think about as vacations or long breaks from work or school, that we also have meso recovery, which we would think about as maybe long weekends or holiday breaks or mental health days. But also, and this last piece is critical, that we have micro recovery tools that allow us brief periods of rest and recovery that we can employ all day long. Again, whether that's taking 5 minutes to do a recentering exercise, whether that's getting outside and taking a quick walk, whether that's listening to a piece of music that you really enjoy that helps reset yourself or refocus yourself. The micro recoveries are also critically important, and that's something that I like to talk with students a lot about as they learn more about themselves, to really develop a toolkit of micro recovery techniques. So the bottom line here is that opportunities for stress are unfortunately all around us, but we have a choice in how we respond. How we think about events really contributes to what we perceive as stressful and then what we do about it. And with practice, it is possible to really think about and change how you respond and ultimately how you feel around stressful events. You have the power to manage your stress, particularly with micro recovery breaks throughout your day. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to talking with you more on March 30th.